By 1961, John F. Kennedy came in, and very quickly he launched the war. By 1962, the U.S. Air Force was bombing South Vietnam with South Vietnamese markings, but it didn't mislead anyone. And Kennedy authorized napalm, chemical warfare to destroy crops and ground cover. He began the programs that drove ultimately millions of peasants into either essentially concentration camps called strategic hamlets or into the urban slums, and in general launched a major war. Well, it looked for a while to Washington as if it was succeeding, but by the time of the Kennedy assassination, shortly after, it became clear that the place was totally out of control. After that came more troops, more violence. By 1967, the destruction of South Vietnam was so complete that Bernard Fall, the leading military historian and Vietnam specialist, much respected in the United States, in his he was killed in Vietnam. After his last commentary, said that he doubted that Vietnam would survive as a historical and cultural entity under the assault of the most enormous military machine ever launched against an area this size. He was talking about South Vietnam. South Vietnam was the main target of the U.S. attack. And it's the place where you have the suffering from Agent Orange. Later, in retrospect, McGeorge Bundy, who was National Security Advisor for Kennedy and Johnson, he reflected that probably the United States should have ended the war in 1965 after the Suharto military coup, because by then, essentially everything had been accomplished. He said it was a mistake to keep fighting on at that point. We had what we wanted. And I think that's essentially correct. My own feeling was the same a couple of years later. The war dragged on for domestic reasons, other reasons, and of course horribly, terribly destructive in Indochina. I mean, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, later estimated 3.8 million deaths in Vietnam. I don't know if that's right. We don't count our victims, so you don't know. And of course, the deaths continue. People are still dying from Agent Orange and the residue of the war. Like I said, they didn't turn Vietnam into a colony. And by now, it's semi-colonized, but not at that time. So it was a quagmire. It was costing us too much. And Iraq and Afghanistan are the same, so the U.S. didn't learn anything. These are very different situations. In Iraq, the United States actually suffered a defeat, not like Vietnam. It had to slowly abandon all of its war aims. There's no time to go through this now, but it's easily documented. In fact, the victor in Iraq was Iran, to the extent that any foreign country was. So yeah, Iraq was a disaster. Afghanistan is a different case. There, the United States is caught in a certain similarity to Vietnam. It's caught in a war that the political leadership knows they can't win in any meaningful terms. The Obama administration is aware that it's difficult to get out, because even though the population here is strongly opposed to the war, the dynamics of propaganda, imperial ideology, and so on are such that if any president pulls out of Afghanistan without something that can be called a victory, they're going to be bitterly denounced as traitors, not honoring the blood of our brave boys and girls, and so on and so forth. Again, that's standard imperial ideology. And they don't want to face it, so they're trying to seek a way to get out. But I don't think it has anything to do with not learning lessons of Vietnam. On the subject of war reparations, Iraq was forced to pay repairs for Kuwait. Yeah, of course, because Iraq was an enemy. It was defeated. Enemies who are defeated have responsibilities. Germany had to pay reparations. Iraq had to pay reparations. The victors never do. The defeated have to undergo war crimes trials. The victors don't. And this is, that's so, I mean, take, say, the International Court of Justice. There's one country in the world that was condemned by the International Court of Justice for terrorism, and that has rejected the judgment. The United States, in the case of the war against Nicaragua, was condemned for, which is an interesting judgment if you look at it carefully. When the United States agreed to World Court jurisdiction in 1946, that's when the court was established with U.S. initiative, and the U.S. did agree to jurisdiction, but on a crucial condition, that the U.S. cannot be tried for violation of any international treaty. So it can't be tried for violation of the UN Charter or of the Charter of the Organization of American States, no international treaty, which means the United States is free to commit aggression, genocide, anything it likes, and that can't be brought to the court. So therefore, the court had to restrict the case to very narrow grounds, a bilateral treaty between Nicaragua and the United States, and they judged that the United States had violated the bilateral treaty. I mean, it's like charging Hitler for crossing a street, going across a red light or something. But it was charged with unlawful use of force, which means international terrorism. The press reacted by denouncing the court as a hostile forum, so it doesn't matter what they decide. Just like reparations, or, as I said, George H.W. Bush, the more liberal Bush, said, I'll repeat, that we will forgive the Vietnamese for what they did to us if they devote their efforts to finding the bones of American pilots, the only moral issue left over the war. No comment, not among the intellectual classes, not among the French elite. Yeah, sure, that's the way imperial powers operate.